Paul says he practiced the art of evaluation. Now, something interesting about Paul when he wrote these words also is this. When Paul wrote these words, he was probably approximately 60 years of age in a prison cell. He had been following Christ for 30 years. He had done a multiplicity of things. He had written 13 letters almost that would be included in your Bible and in mine. New Testament scholars say that the Apostle Paul had traveled approximately 10,000 miles throughout the Roman Empire, establishing small congregations, small groups of believers. He had traveled 10,000 miles. He had done that at the age of 55 to 60 years in a day and time when planes, trains, and automobiles were unavailable. From all obvious appearances, the Apostle Paul had arrived. He had done well. He was a success. And yet Paul says, as I scan the cracks and the crevices of my life today from this cell, I do not consider myself to have arrived. Paul says there's a place for evaluation. In the midst of this Christmas season, in the midst of this Thanksgiving season, in the midst of all the obligations that you and I are up against, Paul says, don't forget the place of evaluation. I just read a book by a gentleman by the name of Jack Welch. The title of the book is Winning. Some of you may have read the book. It's a tremendous book. Jack Welch was the one-time CEO of GE, and he tells in that book a tremendous story about a young man who was a Harvard graduate almost, and he wanted to speak with Mr. Welch about his career opportunities and his goals in life. So he set up an appointment with Mr. Welch, and he went into his office and he began talking with him about the two options that seemingly lay before him with regard to his postgraduate life. And he says, I have two options before me. I either want to go into international banking or I want to go into management consulting. And he began to ask Mr. Welch about those fields and what assignments he could expect and what kind of return he could expect in his work and for his labor and for all of his toils. And so they talked about all of those things for about 45 minutes. And Welch says this, that the young man meticulously wrote down virtually everything that Welch said. It was as though he was hanging on Welch's each and every word. He was writing them down. And at the end of 45 minutes, the young man took the pad upon which he had written. He opened up his case, and he slid the pad into the satchel. When he did, Welch noticed this, that in the case that he had opened up were all kinds of drawings, intricately laid out, detailed, of cars. Welch said, don't close it. Show me those drawings. And so he pulls them out, and Welch begins flipping through them. And he's astounded at this young man's talent. And the young man says, I love cars. I've always loved cars all of my life. He says, I draw cars in class. My room at home was filled with posters and drawings of cars. I go to the NASCAR events. He says, I even got to go to the Indianapolis 500 this year, and he was overwhelmed by cars. And Jack Welch said to him these words, why are you thinking about consulting and banking? You need to go to Detroit because that's where your bliss is. And then Welch writes, he was almost a Harvard graduate, but he had never practiced the art of self-evaluation. This holiday season, let's remember, there is a place for evaluation. Just like Paul, just like that young man. for us to say as husbands and wives, as employees and employers, I'm not what I once was, but I do not consider myself as having arrived. That's the first word. Evaluation. Second word. Paul says, not only should there be the art of evaluation, he says there also should be some elimination. Listen to his words. He says, this one thing I do, even though I have not arrived, this one thing I do, forgetting that which is behind. Paul says, I do some evaluating, but I also do some eliminating. This one thing I do, I forget that which is behind. Paul says, if I'm going to be all that God has intended for me to be, I'm not going to waste any time on yesterday. Yesterday is gone. The past is the past. It's as though Paul is saying here, there needs to be a time in our lives when we let go of the guilt, and we let go of the grief, and we let go of the grudges, and we let go of the ruptured relationships, and we let go of the hostilities, and we even let go of the failures, and we stop looking at that which is behind. Paul says there needs to be evaluation, but there also, in this holiday season, needs to be an elimination. There needs to be some things we forget. I was reading this week about the paradox of us human beings, and the writer in the article I was reading sums it up well. This is my experience. I suspect that it's your experience. Listen to the way this writer describes the human condition. He says, it is human nature that this is the way we work. We tend to remember the things that we should forget, and we tend to forget those things that we should remember. We tend to hold on to the memories that we should let go of, and we tend to forget the things that we should hold on to. And all of the lessons that we've learned through this thing called life. There needs to be elimination. Maybe as you make your way into this holiday season, chances are, as you enter into this holiday season, there are some things that need to be forgotten in your life. What are they? Clara Barton was the founder of the American Red Cross. In her biography, the story is told of someone who did a grievous and malicious and vindictive and hateful thing toward Clara Barton. Years later, an associate of hers spoke about that event to Ms. Barton. And Ms. Barton responded with these words. You know, about that, I distinctively remember forgetting it. There are those things this year that we need to, in this holiday season, distinctively remember forgetting.